What if the only man who helped a lonely Apache widow wanted nothing in return? When she asked, "Do you only want my body like the others?" His answer changed both their lives forever. Stay until the end for this unforgettable Wild West story of respect, courage, and true love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon for more inspiring stories. Arizona Territory, 1886. The summer storms had lasted longer than anyone could remember. Days of relentless rain had turned the dusty trails into thick mud, washed away wooden bridges, and left many isolated homesteads struggling to survive. Cowboy Ethan Walker had spent the morning riding across the valley, checking abandoned cattle fences and delivering supplies to families who had been cut off by the floods. As the grey clouds slowly parted, he noticed smoke rising from a lonely cabin near the foothills. Curious, he guided his horse toward the small home, unaware that this simple decision would change 2 lives forever. The cabin looked worn by time, but someone was still fighting to protect it. Near the cabin, a young Apache widow named Ayanna struggled to lift a heavy fence post that had collapsed during the storm. Her clothes were soaked with rain, and strands of dark hair clung to her face as she worked alone with determined hands. She refused to give up, even though exhaustion was written across her face. Ethan quietly dismounted from his horse and approached slowly so he would not frighten her. Without saying a word, he picked up the fallen timber and helped her steady the broken fence. His movements were calm and respectful, showing no sign of pity or pride. Ayanna watched him carefully, uncertain why a stranger would help without asking questions. For several minutes, they worked together in complete silence. The only sounds came from dripping water, distant thunder, and the steady tapping of Ethan's hammer. When the fence finally stood upright again, Ethan noticed the woodpile beside the cabin had nearly disappeared. Without waiting for permission, he gathered an old axe lying nearby and began chopping fresh firewood. Each swing echoed through the quiet valley as neat stacks of logs slowly grew beside the door. Ayanna remained silent, unable to understand why this cowboy continued working without expecting payment or praise. Every other outsider she had met had demanded something in return for even the smallest favor. Since her husband had died defending members of their tribe during a violent land dispute 2 years earlier, life had become painfully difficult. Several dishonest traders and ranchers had visited her cabin, pretending to offer friendship, protection, or business deals. Their smiles always disappeared when she refused their hidden demands. Some wanted control of her late husband's land, while others saw only a lonely woman living without family nearby. Those painful experiences had taught Ayanna never to trust easy promises. Kind words had often hidden cruel intentions, leaving scars that could not be seen but were carried deep inside her heart every single day. As evening approached, the golden sunlight finally broke through the storm clouds and painted the mountains with warm shades of orange and red. Ethan finished stacking the last pieces of firewood before dusting off his hands. He thanked Ayanna for allowing him to help and prepared to leave without asking for food, money, or even a place to rest. His quiet departure confused her more than his kindness. Every man she had known would have stayed long enough to demand gratitude or expect a reward. Ethan simply adjusted his hat, checked the saddle on his horse, and smiled politely before turning toward the trail. Something inside Ayanna refused to let him leave, without asking the question that had haunted her for years. Her voice trembled slightly as she called his name. Ethan turned around and waited patiently. Looking directly into his eyes, she whispered, "Do you only want my body like the others?" The painful words hung heavily in the evening air. Ethan could see fear, disappointment, and years of heartbreak behind her guarded expression. Instead of stepping closer, he respectfully removed his hat and took a small step backward, making sure she felt completely safe. His silence lasted only a moment, but it carried more understanding than many speeches ever could. Finally, Ethan spoke in a calm and steady voice. "No, ma'am," he replied gently. "I came because no one should carry pain alone. Your trust is worth far more than anything I could ever take. Kindness loses its value the moment it expects a reward." Ayana stared at him in disbelief. No one had ever answered her with such honesty or respect. Tears quietly gathered in her eyes, not because she was weak, but because someone had finally seen her as a human being instead of an opportunity. As Ethan rode away beneath the fading sunset, Ayana realized that for the first time since losing her husband, hope had returned to her lonely heart. The following morning, the first rays of sunlight spread across the Arizona desert, turning the distant mountains golden. Ethan Walker returned to Ayana's cabin, carrying a saddlebag filled with flour, dried meat, fresh vegetables, medicine, and warm blankets. He had purchased everything with his own savings, knowing the recent storms had made it difficult for nearby families to reach town. When Ayana opened the cabin door, surprise filled her face. She had expected the cowboy to disappear like everyone else after earning her trust. Instead, he simply smiled, placed the supplies on the porch, and greeted her with the same quiet respect he had shown the day before. After making sure Ayana had enough food for several weeks, Ethan noticed rainwater still dripping through the damaged roof. Without asking for anything in return, he climbed onto the cabin with fresh wooden boards, nails, and his old hammer. For hours he repaired every broken section while the hot desert sun beat down on his back. Ayana watched from below, offering water whenever he paused to rest. He accepted only a small drink before continuing his work. By afternoon, the roof was secure, and for the first time since the storms, the little cabin felt safe and protected against another heavy rain. As Ethan gathered his tools and prepared to ride away, Ayana asked him to stay for a simple meal. They sat outside beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree, sharing bread, beans, and fresh coffee. For the first time in years, Ayana spoke openly about her life. She explained that after her husband died defending members of their Apache community, several dishonest ranchers claimed that the land surrounding her cabin legally belonged to them. They repeatedly visited with fake documents, threats, and promises, hoping fear would force her to leave. Living alone had made resisting them more difficult with every passing season. Ethan listened carefully without interrupting. He understood that Ayana's greatest battle was no longer against loneliness, but against powerful men who believed a widow could easily be intimidated. Looking directly at her, he promised she would not have to face the fight alone. Early the next morning, he rode to the nearest town and began speaking with neighbors, traders, and long-time settlers who remembered Ayana's husband purchasing the land years earlier. Several honest townspeople agreed to testify, recalling the original agreement and recognizing the rancher's claims as dishonest attempts to seize valuable property through intimidation. Within days, Ethan helped organize every document and witness before presenting the case to the local sheriff. Although the dishonest ranchers tried to influence officials with money and false statements, the evidence against them continued to grow. Older settlers confirmed the property boundaries, while respected merchants testified that Ayana and her husband had paid for the land fairly. The sheriff refused to ignore the growing proof and arranged a formal hearing before the county court. Throughout the entire process, Ethan never tried to speak over Ayana. Instead, he stood beside her, encouraging her to tell her own story with confidence and dignity. Several weeks later, the courtroom filled with anxious silence as the judge delivered the final decision. After reviewing every witness, document, and testimony, the court ruled completely in Ayana's favor. The dishonest ranchers were ordered to stop all harassment and permanently abandon their false claims. Relief washed across Ayana's face as tears quietly filled her eyes. For the first time since losing her husband, she no Longer feared someone would steal the only home filled with his memories. Outside the courthouse, many townspeople congratulated her, while Ethan simply smiled, believing justice itself was the greatest reward anyone could receive. When they returned to the cabin that evening, the setting sun painted the Arizona sky with brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Standing beside the repaired fence where they had first met, Ayanna looked at Ethan with grateful eyes and softly said, "You didn't save me because you wanted something. You simply reminded me that good people still exist." Ethan smiled warmly before answering, "Real love begins with respect, and true strength is protecting someone without expecting a reward." From that day forward, their friendship became known across the Arizona frontier as a story of kindness, courage, dignity, and the quiet power of genuine respect.